Thanks a lot for agreeing to do this. Really appreciate it. But yeah, no, I guess like, we could just start with some like very basic questions. Just like, yeah, what's your name? Like, where are you from? Like, what school do you go to? Like, what's your major? That kind of thing.
Okay.
Just very basic.
Okay. So I'm Hong Jin. I'm from Malaysia, and then I'm also from Singapore. I met here near US College, and I am a literature major. Final year.
Very cool, very cool. Yeah, do you have any like favorite classes that you've taken or like professors that you've had?
Yeah, actually my capstone supervisor, she's Prof. Emily Dalton. She's my favorite prof here. And it so happens that her class, one particular class I took with her, is my favorite. It's this class called Deaf, Mourning and Memory, Medieval Literature. And we did this class in the middle of the pandemic. So I think it was 2020, and we all had to be socially distanced, but we were still very lucky we could actually have it in person. But it was very interesting because all the texts were talking about the Black Death, and then there we were in the thick of another pandemic. So it felt extra poignant and vivid.
Have you been able to like explore the open curriculum much like throughout or yeah, I mean, do your friends tend to be in like similar majors like literature, or are they just like very spread out?
I feel like they vary. I feel like I make more friends, usually less by classes, but more by like other things like extracurriculars and stuff. Okay, I wouldn't say I explored too much, but definitely different types of literature. So I've been in classes that are like English literature, so that's one, but also Chinese literature. Then I think I explored a bit of what was it? Oh, I did an anthropology class.
Okay.
And yeah, is that about it? Oh, I did a lot of creative writing classes. Yeah, it was quite fun also. Very interesting to do classes that are very like creatively focused at a college level.
For sure. That's very interesting. Do you have any like major moments that happened in college that like made you rethink your like life, or just like made you like gain like important lessons, or like learn specific things about yourself that are going to be like super useful going forward?
Wow, that's a difficult question. Do you mean like I don't know. I mean, I think this one will be shared by many, but that is the whole announcement of the college version. Definitely formative in a way, not the best way, but that I think it made me realize a lot of the things around that I have here, that I think if in another life where the college is not closed, I wouldn't have appreciated as much. Things like how freely accessible the spaces can be. So if you just want to use the performance hall, you want to use the practice rooms, like the art spaces, you don't really have to go through layers of bureaucracy to book them. You just go in and use them as long as there's no one. That has been very nice. And how spontaneous you can organize events. Like the film screening I did for my capstone, I literally just decided to organize it 1 week before, and it came together quite nicely and well. But I think it also made me realize how unique of the experience I have here that I should be cherishing, because things like not just living with your friends here, but also you are actually studying together, and at the same time you are also working together, because it functions like a whole mini college town, right? So a lot of jobs are student run, and some friends I make through like the jobs I do here, and I think that has really been quite a groundbreaking moment.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you feel like Yale and USO is what you expected it to be? Like, did you have sort of like expectations coming in, and like what it would be like, and did you find things out about like Yale and US that just wouldn't know like being on the outside?
I think very interesting, because I think before I came in, or even as I came in, it's always interesting to know like the outside opinion. It's typically like, okay, it's very prestigious, it's probably full of leftists. And I guess my expectations coming in were like, well, I know it's prestigious. I very much subscribe to that fact. And politically, I was a bit afraid. I was like, oh, am I expected to be like, turn into a very, for lack of a better way to describe, like the radicalized political person. And also another expectation was like coming in thinking, oh, will I be doing drastically different things? Like I would do maybe the arts at one moment and just swing towards the science, like in a very mind-blowing way. Or another thing I heard is also how this place is really a space for people to belong. Like especially if you feel like you never quite belonged anywhere else, how this place really people just come together. And I would say after coming in, some expectations did get defied. Things like thinking that the college is full of radicalized like activists. That's not true. I feel like most of the college seem to be in a very moderate political position.
Interesting.
There's definitely the extreme left. I think there's an extreme right as well.
Really? I haven't encountered that.
Yeah. but I mean they are small groups, so typically don't come across them. I think. Yeah, but it's very interesting because there are a lot of like conservative groups over here that I wouldn't have expected to see, but they are here and they still keep to their beliefs quite strongly while being, I guess, open enough to be in a space like that. So that was very interesting to kind of experience. Other things, well, prestigious, I think that one pretty much, well, that expectation stayed the same. It still feels very prestigious even now. And I think I was also quite happy that expectations of it being a place for people to belong kind of, it came true. And I felt like, I haven't felt like there's a school like this that I feel more belong to in my own past. And with regards to the whole, whether or not there was a huge swing to the arts and into the science and back again, well, not as crazy as I thought. I mean, the common curriculum is one thing, you get touched a bit, but I think because we never had the kind of, I think, prerequisite knowledge we need to know to really go deep into each of these fields. So we never I never felt that the swing was too drastic, although it definitely did test some of I think my limits of how far I really can go, and in a way it kind of just reinforced my own belief that okay, I'm probably just gonna be a humanities student. Yeah, I just became more sure of that. I think it was nice to have that kind of exposure.
It's very interesting. Do you think most people like that sort of like experience? Because at least for me, I've had like a very different experience coming from like Amherst.
Yeah.
I guess in a way, like Amherst can definitely be compared to UNS in a lot of ways, but one way in which it does differ is that it has basically no common curriculum, and it's just like as one required class. And if you really wanted, if you're like a huge physics nerd, for instance, you could just take like one like the first year seminar, and then you can take like 31 like physics classes or like math classes. So if you want to, you can do absolutely no exploration of like the greater curriculum, or you could spend nearly all your time exploring like different classes if you wanted to. So yeah, I think in that way, like Amherst does breed a lot of sort of like some students who are just like hyper focused on one subject. So yeah, I'm curious if like the way in which Yale and US is set up, and that like all students have to go through this like common core, like maybe that helps like bring students together in a way that doesn't really happen at Amherst, because I feel like there's maybe more of a sense of interconnectedness with the student body here that doesn't exist as much in Amherst. Maybe that's a reason why, but I think it's just interesting that you have people who will perhaps never do like quantitative subjects again, or people who will never like do anthropology again, like taking these classes and just like going to their own special missions.
Yeah.
Is it a waste of time, or is it like meaningful for a lot of people?
Probably. I mean, I know plenty of people who don't like it, but also plenty of people who simply just, I mean, they're not a fan of course, touching things that they're not good at, but I think speaking from my own experience, there's definitely that kind of interconnectedness that I felt, because a lot of these people, I probably just meet them once, but somewhere down the road, we kind of still remember that, oh, we're from that class, or we had meaningful discussions. And
I see.
I think having a common curriculum, it also felt like a lot of times the classes we're taking concurrently, you can bring a lot of what you're learning from one class and sort of apply it onto another class, or just enough to have a lens to look at. Yeah, so for example, I think things from, what was it called? I think there's this class called Comparative Social Inquiry, or like the more like advanced version of modern social thought, so like all social theories, right? It's very theory heavy and very sociology focused, social sciences, yeah. But a lot of it can kind of be applied onto humanities to look at text, literature, which is what I deal with, or even I think sometimes understanding how numbers and data we see on newspapers, on all kinds of like kind of flowchart presentations we see online or wherever can be kind of manipulated to actually become quite political. Like sometimes I think one eye-opening thing was during I think the quantitative reasoning class in year 1 when they showed us, oh, there's this pie chart, but you realize that they don't really add up to like the whole number, and then you're like, oh, there's something wrong there. And I feel like as a casual viewer, like it just appears on Twitter or something, I wouldn't have this. And getting the chance to kind of like see that way was interesting for me, I think. Yeah.
How did you get interested in literature? Was that something you knew you wanted to major in coming in, or were you kind of entering Yale and just thinking, I will let the common curriculum hold my interests?
Right. I feel like both at the same time. So I definitely did literature before then, for O levels and A levels. Coming in thinking I still like literature, but I wanted to see if the common curriculum or just classes in general might push me down somewhere else. But yeah, it had the opposite effect. It was like the more I explored, the more I became certain that okay, they're not for me. I'll probably stick to what I want to do. Yeah, but I think I like literature because of how I get to deal with stories. I think I get to deal with textual or aesthetic details that usually doesn't seem to serve a particular productive purpose. They're not really commercially valuable, if you want to put it that way. But they still have an effect as a reader, as someone who watches something. And I want to know like why is it that these things have the power ability to make us feel in certain ways. So I thought, well, I think literature is the best place to explore. Definitely there were some other adjacent fields relating to what I was sort of interested in the moment that I kind of wanted to look at, like urban studies or even anthropology. Then I think just being exposed a little bit to social sciences, I realized I think I preferred the methodology in literature. Yeah, less. I don't do very well with numbers, which might be why I shy away more from like I think statistics heavy kind of research. Yeah, and anthropology might be the closest that comes to that. But then I feel like if I want to do something more creative and less rigid, like anthropology, then why not I just stick with literature since it's something I kind of know already. And yeah, maybe I just did not vibe with the social science research method. I could be just that.
I get that. Yeah, I guess like I was going to ask like when did you decide, or like why did you decide to write a capstone? But I guess is it a mandatory thing for all literature?
It used to be.
Okay.
It used to be, but I think with the school closure, I think because a lot of faculty members are and were leaving, so a lot of majors started to open up the choice for capstone option. And literature offered between the traditional capstone and about a 5,000 word extended research paper. And I felt that why I decided to capstone in the end was one thing, I wanted the flexibility to choose a topic and text I wanted to work with, and I wanted to choose my own advisor, because if you do an extended option, then it's very much tied to a certain body you take, and that means thematically you are tied down with terms of faculty you're working with is also tied down. And I'm like, 5,000 is not that far off from a 10,000 word kind of project, so I might as well just do the long one, which I mean, okay, this is like slightly different, but also if I want a chance at going for graduate school, I feel capstone, especially for humanities, is particularly important because in a way it shows what is your magnum opus or what is your interest and demonstrates it in a very sustained manner. Yeah, so yeah, quite different from maybe social sciences, because my friends told me that their profs would tell them, oh, actually your capstone is not that important. You know, what's more important is probably like field experience or research methods. Yeah,
that's very interesting. Yeah, so I guess that's an interesting like topic to go down because at least at Amherst or like at Williams, for example, my impression is that theses, at least at Amherst, it's not required to write a thesis or the equivalent to a capstone. Yet people opt to do it for like Latin honors or like they want to go to graduate school. And at least for me, like it was always like basically never a question that I would want to write a thesis just because I'm interested in like graduate school and research and all of that. But I don't know. For me personally, I think like the idea of writing a thesis was always that loomed large like for me throughout college. So I think like going to somewhere where like at like Yale and US for instance, where everyone basically has to write a thesis or like pursue some sort of like large project in their senior year, is that something that like looms large for a lot of students? Like do people start to like think about it or like talk about it early on, or is it just like something that kind of like naturally develops like throughout sort of college?
I think I did because of the sheer scale, right?
For sure.
So how I don't know. I like to plan things before I start.
For
so
sure.
Knowing that there's such a thing looming and not wanting to panic too much, I started to think about it in year 3 and year 4, and year 3 and year 2, and I was just thinking already like the kind of possibilities of what I'm even interested in, and a lot of it came down to I guess how much interest I have in something, and do I have the skills needed to look at this particular work. And at first I was thinking like, because the material I eventually worked on, there are no experts in that field around, so why not I just pick something that a prof is good at here? Like since my advisor does medieval literature, why not I just pick something that's close enough and I might be able to do something easier. But I think that would have fulfilled like the whole having the necessary skill set or support to do, but I might not have enough interest to actually sustain me through the whole
Exactly.
thing. So I think I definitely thought ahead. But even thinking ahead didn't quite help much in the end, because I just ended up panicking anyway. So even though I knew what I was going to do, narrowing down to like a proper research question or like the scale of it, it still took a lot of time.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So I guess what work did you end up like working with for your thesis?
Right. So I ended up looking at this anime film called Kara no Kyokai, which means the boundary of emptiness, or also the Garden of Sinners. It's a series of anime films, and the one I looked at specifically is the 5th one called Paradox Spiral, which is narratively the climax of the film. It's also the film series, and it's also the most complex, densest in terms of its borrowing of ideas from various religions like Taoism, Christianity, Buddhism, and I think I picked it because I enjoyed the film, but I actually didn't understand a lot of it, and I felt like what better opportunity than to use a capstone to try and figure things out. Yeah, and I like the aesthetics, I like the studio that's behind it, and all the works that they've done afterwards. So I thought this was an important film for me to understand in terms of its aesthetics and its storytelling, in order to be able to better appreciate what comes after.
Yeah, so I guess like following up on that, when did you, or maybe there wasn't like a specific moment where you decided you wanted to pursue like a thesis on this movie, but I guess like like made you interested in this film? Like, how did you find it? Did you originally get into it like through earlier works like Fate, like back in that day?
Right. So, yeah, speaking in terms of the wider pool of works, definitely I came into the whole like Typhoon universe from Fate. I think it was when I was maybe 13, 14. At that time I saw parts of the anime and I was like, oh, what is this thing? I remember looking at Fate and thinking, it's too much fantasy for me, you know,
Sure,
like,
sure.
like it's too complicated. The rules are too difficult to understand.
Yeah.
But somehow it just stuck, and then I end up going back to watch it, and then yeah, ever since then I just keep going deeper and deeper into the works, and eventually I think I found the Color Kyukai series sometime when I was 17 or 18, and why I wanted to really work on it in the end, or what struck me was aesthetically it has a lot of similar themes to Fate and probably other Typhoon works, but something about the aesthetic of the films really drew me in. I realized despite very complicated things, this film didn't demand me to understand everything as a casual viewer. Like, I could still enjoy it even without knowing all the magic rules, and I actually come to appreciate sometimes the moments in the films where there was no action, there was nothing supernatural complicated, and it was just the two main characters like Shiki and Mikia in the apartment just like talking and bantering to each other. Those are very still and quiet scenes, but I feel like it was very interesting how the series was able to draw me in like that. And of course I think musically and graphically in terms of animation, in terms of I think the level of thought put into the sound design was quite it really impressed me as well. Really captivated me. Something about the music and the songs that communicated part of whatever I was feeling while watching, but couldn't fully articulate or understand because of how dense things were. How the songs were able to kind of sing it out musically, like express it, was very magical to me.
I have to ask, like, did you watch the movie before you started to like write the thesis, or was that just something you watched when you were
Right. Yeah, definitely. It was something I watched way before, and I'm a person who usually like rewatch or rereads the things I really like. So from books to anime to films to TV shows, I like to go back to that after the first time. Sometimes I just leave it on like absentmindedly, just hearing the sound and all, and it's too slightly compulsive to the point I just keep doing it. Until to the point I think I got a sense of familiarity with it. I think that's why I also had enough of confidence that I could embark on it for the capstone. Yeah.
Got it. Do you remember what your first reactions to the film were like when you watched it? How old were you when you watched it?
Yeah, around 17, 18, I think. Let me see. So I obviously watched like the first film in the series as it was. My first reaction was just I didn't fully understand. Yeah. But I was eager to keep watching, and I think the more I watched, especially when I got to this particular film, I was like, I have no idea what was going on. But the characters, I think because the characters were the same throughout, and the characters has such unique like qualities about them that I really liked. So they were the things that kind of kept me grounded, even as I didn't understand it. And I was mind blown. And I think especially for the fifth film, when the climax came, I was like, wow, it feels epic, but why is it epic? I don't know. But I was very happy because the characters, something about the aesthetic expression just was enough to tell me that the characters have made it through something. You know, they in some ways have overcome some previous obstacle or challenge they had to learn, lesson they have to like kind of overcome, and still don't fully know if I can articulate it, to be honest. Yeah, but my first reaction was definitely, yeah, great graphics, great music, don't understand, and
How did your professor like react to your proposal of it? Like, did she know about it like at all? Like, what was her reaction to watching the film or like being exposed to it? Yeah.
No, she did not know about it at all. I might have briefly mentioned because I think in a different class with a different professor, I tested the waters a little bit by writing a research paper on the first film in the series. That professor also did not know anything about it. And I think it turned out reasonably well, and I liked what I did with it. So when I approached my own supervisor this time, I just told her my reason for choosing it. So the whole, I want to figure it out because I don't know, and I feel like there's a lot of resonant material for me to work with. And I think because I worked with her and I took quite a few of her classes, so she knows me reasonably well. And hearing my reasoning was probably enough for her to feel confident that it would turn out well. So she said yes, and all I did was like, okay, I pass you this like thumb drive to film. Please watch it. And I told her I advise not watching during like while you're eating because apparently my previous professor did that, and he was like suddenly realized that okay, you should not be eating because there's a lot of horror that does not go well with food. So my prof took those like advice, and then she watched, and then when I kind of asked her about it, she was like, yeah, I did not fully understand. It all happened very fast. But interestingly, there were a lot of moments that stuck with her. Even though as we went along, she felt like okay, she had to go back to rewatch some of the stuff. But there were things that like just jumped out at her from the very start. That and I think her preliminary opinion was that it's very intriguing. There's a lot of things going on. It's like,
And then when you hosted your screening, which I attended, how did when you talked to people after the screening, what did people think? Because I think the audience wasn't really comprised of people who had maybe watched that much anime or anime films before, so it must have been pretty jarring to have that be their first experience, and also that being the fifth film in the series. I guess that's a bit jarring as well, not knowing the lore of the series.
I think in general I feel like people, especially immediately after, there was a sense of relief, or everyone just broke into conversation. I didn't really hear exactly until I went to speak with them more individually, how they felt, but everyone was definitely quite excited by it still by the end of it. I definitely noticed there were moments where people were just gasping in horror, or they were straight up covering their faces, especially when it got very disturbing. I'm actually more surprised that most of them actually stayed until the very end. Actually, I think all of them wanted to, it's just some of them, they had to leave early for other things. But I think as I asked them more closely about their opinions, especially after I gave another presentation on it, people were very, very invested, way more than I thought they could. Given something that is so alienating and so confusing, people were saying that they want to watch the rest of the series, and I was like, wow, I feel like if there was a goal I had that night, it was to convince you that it's a good thing to watch. And I was very happy to hear that. And I think one friend even told me that he never understood anime as a whole because he just felt so, he can't get into it. I think things even for Spirited Away, which is supposed to be a masterpiece, he never understood, never know what's so good about it. But this one, he said, it's the first anime that shook him, so that he understood so this is what it's supposed to be, not just about the film itself, but the whole medium as a whole. And there were a lot of discussions, especially for people who know a little bit about the films or who have watched some anime before. Those who have watched anime before were like, it's an anime like no other. And those who know a little bit about the films are now get very eager to go into the details of like, oh, why did this character do this? Like, why, what's this concept going on? Yeah, and for those who never watched this film, never knew about, who don't watch anime in general, I think they had a good time.
Yeah.
They had a good time.
It's so interesting because I feel like I was kind of expecting the same thing as you in terms of like people not being as invested in the film because I mean I think like at least Fate, like Ufotable's like other work is famously like hard to get into because of all the like lore and like the different like series. It's like where do you start? Like how do I make sense of all of this?
Yeah.
And I guess Kano no Kyokai like precedes that,
Yeah.
so it's like it has less of an audience, of less, I guess like accessibility, and then I guess like some of the works like may not be translated even, or maybe it's like not as palatable for the Western audience in some ways. So it's really interesting that like people, it was quite well received, and like people watching it like nowadays, but like other animes.
I think they asked a lot of very good questions, and they asked a lot of questions.
Yeah, it was really cool to see how like engaged people were. So like, I guess how do you think Kano no Kyokai like Paradox Cloud compares like modern anime? Like, is it similar like to more the recent stuff by like Ufotable, or is it like different?
I think so. From little I know, it's at least when it first came out, it was very unusual for its time because so there was this quote that I started with in my capstone, which is in a trailer for like a sequel to Kara Kyokai series, they say that this was a legendary theatrical project that changed the history of animation. And my first reaction was like, wait, who are you to say that? And
exactly.
It's a very bold claim to make, and especially when you have people like Miyazaki who's still around, and Spirited Away is relatively recent, and then you have Mamoru Oshii's Ghost in the Shell as well.
Right.
So you either have to be that commercially successful or that critically acclaimed. And Kara no Kyokai was not quite in either extreme. It was very successful domestically, DVD sales, box office, but it never made the kind of waves that Spirited Away or Ghost in the Shell did. But I think what was unique about when it first came out was how daring and how experimental it was. And it wasn't by an established director like Mamoru or Miyazaki. So Ufotable was really new back then. And they said yes to a series of 7 films, not just 1 or 2. And it was all released in just 2 years, back to back almost. I think their original plan was to release it in, was it just less than a year? I don't know how that was even possible, but 2 years was actually the result of some of the production actually stalling and dragging on. But still, it was quite impressive. And of course, all of the films, they were helmed by relatively new directors. Some were not even directors, they were like animators. They never done directing before. The credited director name for the final film in the series is not a real person, it's a pseudonym for 4 other directors. So in terms of that alone, just the form, it was very, very unusual. And the result were quite stunning because the level of I think how they managed to bring computer graphics in animation to the forefront was very impressive. It's very the blend between it, the compositing between 3D models and 2D animation was at a kind of seamlessness that hasn't been seen in the industry back then. And I think a lot of it was amplified by the lighting and particle effects that Ufotable has become very, very well known for. Things like using very cinematic techniques. So a lot of point of view shots that you usually don't get. And I think the kind of, how do you put it, the very, very, very photorealistic depiction of backgrounds. It's almost like you're looking at a photo or an actual live action kind of movie. Those were unprecedented. And I think how it compares to the rest of anime industry now is that a lot of these techniques that first became experimental in Kara no Kyokai has become a new kind of convention or standard. Ufotable's current films and works are very much shaped by the aesthetic back then. Like one look at Fate, you kind of see where that blend of very realist representation and non-realist representation comes in. In fact, it's been polished since then. Same thing with music. Their ability to choreograph really good fight scenes, and how they took it to the next level with Demon Slayer as well. Because I think it comes through in the whole like the fighting style in Demon Slayer. You know, you have all those like different breathing forms, and the aesthetic they choose to incorporate was from the Edo period, like Kyo art style, right? Like the water breathing, fire breathing. I feel like the film Karana Kyokai as a film series kind of paved the way for that to happen, and currently they're one of the biggest studios around. And I think a lot of anime since then have also tried to kind of do some of what they do, be it in terms of music choice or having more photorealistic backgrounds without fearing that it's supposed to be some kind of escape experience. Although of course different directors and different animes have different takes on the techniques that Ufotable kind of popularized.
Right. Yeah, it's so interesting. Like, also, I mean, you just talked about a lot of different techniques that were used in the film, and I guess a lingering question is like, how did you get this approved as a literature thesis? To what extent is this a literature thesis? Because I guess like it is an adaptation of a light novel, but yeah, I mean I think you have at your disposal like a bunch of other materials, like I guess primary sources that you can draw on, like the light novel itself, the movie, but also like the production notes and like the sort of like storyboards and stuff like that. Those are all like available to you. So do you feel like your thesis ended up being in spirit like a literature thesis, or does it like feel different from other people's because you have access to all of this like contemporary like documentation?
I think in many ways, if you really I think fundamentally it remains a literature thesis. It's just not conventionally literature probably because I mean traditional literature is usually concerned with print media, novels, and actual textual materials. But film analysis has been on the rise. I suppose it's a blend between kind of visual aesthetics analysis and traditional modern literary study. But I feel like the essence of it is the same. Like you have to do close reading, you have to look at details and make interpretations. Having those documentations helped in some way. But I think for me, a lot of the work I did was primarily on the film itself. Okay. So the secondary, like the materials that I kind of supplemented with, they are usually like checks along the way just to inform me if I go wildly out of line. Right. In case this wasn't actually like coherent with the line of thought, the original narrative in the light novel. Yeah, because knowing that the films kind of stuck quite closely to the books, and so I think a lot of it was dealing with the film directly, and I don't know. Were you asking like? I don't know. Sorry. What else did you watch?
Yeah, I guess I was also curious. Like, I mean, what I was originally asking was like what a literature thesis looks like generally, because I guess like my assumption is that hey, maybe someone is looking into like some I don't know, like 18th century like writer from like Europe, and maybe they're examining all of like their body of work because they're like not very well known, or maybe they're looking into like one like work of the classic literature, and obviously that person that writer's probably like long dead, so they can't ask the person, and maybe like documents from like what they thought about like their writing process don't really exist. But in your case, I guess you have like all these like director's notes and stuff, so that may change things. Like I don't know.
I think with regards to that, at least in the context of US, what a literature capstone would usually look like yes, you definitely have that people looking into classical antiquity to Middle Ages, Renaissance, and 18th and 19th century. Look at those classics, and it's probably less terrifying because you have a whole body of analysis and literature on them already, and people like to do a lot of comparative capstones as well. So they look at two texts instead of one. People like to go like to do things that has a lot of established theories. But I think what my capstone kind of did differently was it's very contemporary, as you said. So there's not been a lot of research done on it. That part was particularly difficult because it means a lot of the analysis that you heard me briefly talk about are my own findings, my own interpretations that kind of came based on the kind of like very rough framework I put together. It is definitely not been tested, but it is a first step at something that hasn't been looked at. And I think this may sound radical, but for a lot of the literature, like kind of thesis or capstones that focus on older works with lots of theories, it's in a way they can get away with saying things because other people have said that. It's not too hard to say like a point branching out from it. It's probably harder for them to find like a space to locate what their research is about because so much has been said already. But there's a comfort in knowing that you have a lot of things to fall back on.
For sure.
Yeah, and I guess that's the kind of comfort that I did not have. But I also feel like a lot of the times a lot of these classics have been looked at way too much. Or like, as in, yes, I feel like maybe there's more to be seen, but there are also a lot of works right now that's happening right before our eyes. And I feel like a lot of times when we look back on the classics, we have this problem like, we can't pass the author, we can't ask like people who are involved. And here we are in the present, and there are a lot of works here that might or might not just become a classic in 50 years' time. And I'm just thinking, why are we still chasing so far back and ignoring what's happening right here? If this is going to be the things that people are studying in future, then that means we are the people right here that have the chance to actually speak or get closer to the material itself and note down any kind of preliminary and immediate thoughts that we can, so that people after us can kind of pick up and work on it. So I think it's a missed opportunity for people not to seize on it, even though it's definitely difficult, it's not easy. A lot of it requires a certain amount of I think willingness to just be in the realm of discomfort and uncertainty. But I think it's very rewarding as a process because you get to create something that it's that nobody else has done before.
I don't know, since this like Kara no Kyokai is like, or the films are adaptations of light novels, like I guess because Typhoon deals in making, or at least like Nasu has like written like light novels, and there have been visual novel adaptations of said like light novels. I guess like, what is the interest in sort of analyzing those from a like scholarly lens? Like why are those works interesting? Like what is the difference between like light novels and normal novels? Like I guess those are those like specifically like made in Asia? Like I have not really heard of them outside the like Japanese context.
So I think in terms of light novels, I had this question also from a faculty who asked like what are light novels?
It's strange like
he would be like, maybe they're just called novellas, but then I did just a brief search, and light novels are very specific because they tend to be more East Asian, Japanese origin, and they are published usually in A6 format, what they call like the bunkobon like format, and so it's just small enough for you to hold in the palm of your hand.
I see. I didn't know the size was
the size was the thing, and particularly suitable for people who are rushing for commute in Japan, and so you can read with just one hand, and people typically have a very fast consumption rate of light novels, and light novels are also usually comes with illustrations of anime style. So they have this very special relationship with anime as a medium because it's almost like a sister industry where anime industries, once they're not original ideas, they like to look into light novels
I see.
and pick
That's
things
very
from them. Because I guess there's something about the content that light novel writers tend to deal with that may be more suitable or more like, not say suitable, but more comparable and easily translated into the anime medium. Yeah, and I think that's something that's unique to light novels.
I see.
And Taiwan's visual novels are also interesting because I think Tsukihime was the one that really popularized the medium of it being not just staring at words but also a mixture of auditory and visual elements.
Exactly.
So you get to see the text kind of like appearing before you, but according to a rhythm that the author or the creator wants you to feel those words, complete with music, background art, and in a way there's a greater authorial input because your imagination does get limited somewhat to how the author artist wants you to see it. But at the same time, I think it makes for a richer reading experience because as a reader, part of the burden of the imagination can be kind of lifted from your shoulders because the visual novel is doing it for you. And I think a lot of visual novels, especially since Tsukihime, also like to invite the reader to make choices so that it actually leads to different endings, right? And I think that is a particular philosophy that is quite consistent with Taiwan works in general. They like to involve the reader or the watcher as an audience because I think they want you to be part of it to create like the experience. So your decisions as part of the characters actually influence the story outcome, or maybe in Crown of Yokai's context, your participation in making meaning of the signs and the things you see in the films is quite instrumental in enhancing your overall experience of it. Yeah, the willingness to do the work, so to speak.
I guess like this is also something like an impression I got of your thesis, which is that like it's very well researched and you have to look into a lot. You have to think of like you have to think about the movie and the light novel from like a million different perspectives because you have so many different primary sources and so many different avenues where you can like perform analysis. So and also like I think the other thing is that the conclusions that you came to were quite original. So I'm curious like what if you had like an organized research process, like did you talk to like experts or like what sort of books or like theories did you like try to think of when you're like writing your thesis? I think that was like, at least for me, like as an outsider, I was like, wow, how did you like sort of create this sort of like thesis? Like how did he advance his thesis? Like what sort of work had to have like gone into this to make this possible?
Thank you for that. Okay, wait. I think before I answer that, also I think just one more point to add to the previous question was, I guess doing scholarly analysis on this sort of medium, which I mean, Taiwan used to be very. It was a doujin circle, right? So it's very much like almost fan fiction.
Exactly.
I think there's been some research into it about how the doujin circle or doujin works kind of should be considered like legitimate art forms in their own right.
Exactly.
I don't know much about that, but from what I know through my own research process is that a lot of times, especially for something like Kara Yokai that's been not looked into much, the anime community online, in terms of, especially for fans, so fandom wikis or blogs or I think even like YouTube videos and video essays become quite important in helping me get a sense of how to start. What is the feel of the film? What's the feel on the ground look like? Even if they may not turn out to be 100% accurate with their analysis or their documenting, but I feel like I mean, as anime watchers, that's the first place you get information.
Exactly.
And how you know more about the work. So they are very important source, I feel. So I did manage to sign a few of them. And I think with regards to your other question about how the whole process started, like with the theories and everything. To be honest, I didn't go in with a particular theory in mind at first. Because there's always the danger of, in a sense, confirmation bias, where you are trying to fit the film into the theory instead of, fitting the theory into the film. Yeah, because the project should ultimately be about the work. And I think partly it was just academic training here, so we had a whole class that taught us a range of literary theories, and there were just maybe one or two that I felt a bit more resonant with.
Sure.
And also that research paper I did for my prof that was on the first Karate Kyokai film, so I had a brief inkling of what I can use, and I think so. Kristeva's theory of abstraction and Buddhist notions, Zen Buddhist notions of like interdependent self, kind of came from there.
Okay.
Yeah, those were also, especially the Buddhist notion one. That was something that the two like very excellent research done on Karate Kyokai has sort of brought up. Yeah. So those were my starting points, and I think how I kind of found my other way around the rest of the capsule and the film. I think it started off with me thinking that, okay, this sounds very existentialist. I might have to do existentialism somewhere. But then somewhere down the road, I realized I'm not really talking about existentialism. It's really more about audience reception and aesthetic form. The value of the aesthetic form. So I consulted a professor on this, and he's an excellent expert on existentialism. And then he told me, I don't think you need existentialism, because I mean there are a lot of works out there that are quite existentialist in nature, and you only really need the theories if it makes explicit mentions of, say, Jean-Paul Sartre or any of the other known existentialists. So he suggested like defamiliarization, which is this idea that all artworks kind of exist to defamiliarize us from whatever we see in our daily lives, makes the perception of it quite long, and we take extra efforts to look at it. So I think it was these are the few tangents or anchors that kind of like guided me along the way. Usually I think though, instead of theory, it's more of the moments in the films that spoke to me more. Like for example, in Paradox Spiral, the part where Enjo was kind of like shouting at Araya, his creator, or when there's that dream sequence where Shiki is looking at the whole film in yawn. That kind of just struck me from the get-go. You know, those first impressions that we're talking about, and often those first impressions are like, you know, they make the first impression because they are that powerful, I think, and sticking with those first impressions eventually helped me find a trajectory for what my research is supposed to look like. Yeah, it helped me also decide on the theories I'm supposed to use, because I know that I can't run away without talking about these moments. Yeah.
Did you like have a sense of feeling like alone while writing the thesis, and that like you didn't really have too many people to consult with, or did you find solace in like working with professors who like specialize in like philosophy, like certain areas of like philosophy, or did you talk to people who study like manga study though, or not really?
I think I spoke to some profs, like one I spoke with just now who studies existentialism. I also spoke to a prof who specializes in comics, because
at NUS or elsewhere?
Here at
US.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
So I mean, there was a little bit of consulting here and there,
Sure.
but overall I felt it was definitely very much of a very solitary process, I think, because even these people told me that, I mean, they didn't say they can't help me, but from what I could gather is that they're not well versed with the field that I'm looking up to. And the film is many things at once, but it's not strong enough to fit nicely to any one of their views. So the best I could get was just sort of understand how different the film is from like related views. And most of the time, I was kind of working alone. My supervisor was really there to just check the logic of my arguments, and be kind of like a sounding board for me to check my ideas and for me to run for help, for encouragement the moment I feel stuck. Yeah, but most of it had to be done alone, I think. Yeah.
Okay. And like, did you draw inspiration from, I guess, like cultural like influences when you were looking into like Buddhist like psychotherapy and stuff? And I guess like, did your experience abroad in Japan like help you like with the like bunraku like puppetry part of your like thesis?
I think about the bunraku part, not so much, because there was a connection I noticed based on a theory I managed to chance upon while researching. So that was a lucky find on my part. I also didn't get to see like a bunraku theatre performance in Japan because I actually still wasn't aware of the form when I was there. But I would say my time in Japan did help me understand a bit about tendencies in Japanese writing, because there was a class I did on I think what was it, like modern Japanese fiction. So all the, especially the pre-war authors like Edogawa Ranpo, Mori Ogai, this sort of people, to get a sense of what is the literary impulse they might have. Like, it's not directly relevant to the capstone, but aesthetically I could sense like what they were concerned with. And I noticed that the notion of the self is something that keeps kind of recurring, because I think with Meiji Restoration or like the westernization kind of import into Japan at the time, it brought with it a new interpretation of what a self is, a self that is quite different from the traditional Buddhist notions of it being this is a self that is supposed to be independent, it's supposed to be different from I don't know, just divorced from the things around you. I think it was Edogawa Ranpo's one that got me to know that this is a very kind of Lacanian idea of the self that has plagued or like has been on writers' mind in Japan for quite a while. And another thing I picked up while studying in Japan was a different kind of aesthetic experience. And this one was very unexpected, because it wasn't with a literature class, it wasn't with you may not even call it a proper class, so to speak, because it was very experiential. So there was a lot of field trips, and one thing that was stressed by this movement, which is like they call it the Japanese folk crafts movement, Mingei, where I think the person who championed the movement had this idea that while gazing at an artwork, the viewer and the object should not be separate. They should be the same. Or the whole notion that high art has been like too overrated for years and for generations and so on. That so-called like lower art has a lot of beauty in it, because number one, it is not sitting on a pedestal for you to gaze at, but actually it's quite actively part of you, just by being in your everyday life. And I found that particular sentiment slowly creeping into my capstone towards the end, because it just felt like, contextually it does make sense. There has been this sort of a turn in aesthetics appreciation, and it was very much Zen Buddhist. Yeah, so I think that helped me a lot.
By the way, random question. Did you ever think about like the idea of like the Buddhist paintings on like death, with regards to your like thesis? Because I feel like rotting, like death is kind of like a thing in the film. Like there's some of those like images, but that's something like I thought of while like thinking of questions to ask you, and I didn't see that in your thesis. So
right, that's a very interesting question. I think I never thought of using it, but I definitely came across it when I came back from Japan, because I took a class on the female image in Japanese art and literature, and in that class there was this week where we looked at Buddhist paintings and how they like to depict like the cycle of life and death, where you were born and then you die and then you rot and then you so on and so forth, and they like to use the female body usually, not instead of the male body, to depict that stage of decay. So yeah, it's very fascinating because now that you mention it, Paradox Spiral has a lot of that.
Yeah.
But I think I never looked at it because I think that is the distinction my capstone draws away from existentialism. Because I think to go into that, then it would become an existentialist capstone and very much philosophical, which I'm not equipped or prepared to handle. Yeah, so I think that's why I didn't go that much into it. Yeah, whether or not it has an effect on audience reception, I feel like definitely there is. I didn't cover it so much. The brief part the brief interpretation I can offer is probably just the whole idea of abjection and how the film itself just presents a lot of that kind of alienating experience by showing you a lot of moments of corpses, bodily waste to cause that breakdown in yourself and make you feel despair and the need to like cling on to something. Yeah. So I think that's the most that's the little I can say.
Sure.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay. How do people in general react to the fact that you said you tell them that you're going to write a thesis on like anime? Like, what are people's preconceived like notions of that? Like, do people like have the impression that maybe it's like not worth writing about for like a literature thesis, but just because it's so recent, or because like maybe some anime doesn't have that much to analyze, like to be completely different? Right?
To be fair, I would say nobody actually told me that it wouldn't be a good idea.
Interesting.
Those who felt that way probably didn't say it out loud. I could sense though that some professors I spoke to who were not as interested in that idea.
That makes sense.
Like they would try to guide me more towards the existentialism portion, or like talking more about religion and how this new representation of religion might speak to an older representation. So yeah, thankfully no one has told me that it would be bad. But I guess also no one told me that it would be a particularly good thing to look at, because it might just be that most of the literature majors in my year, when they're not really into anime per se, neither are the professors. But that also gave me, I think that's where I saw a place to distinguish myself as a student, because there's been no other capstones here that worked on anime so far, and the profs who looked at it, the students were interested, but it is a rather major aesthetic medium that's been out there for a while, so I felt like why is no one looking at it?
Exactly. I guess like my thinking is like almost like similar to you, is like why has yours been the first like thesis written on anime, right? Because I think something really cool about theses, at least a trend that I've observed about theses or capstones at YNC, is that in the humanities, at least, if not in the sciences as well, they tend to be pretty interesting in the fact that they apply to like a lot of students like lived experiences. Like they do, like a lot of students do make the move to pick projects that they can like work on because they have some personal like experience or like background with the topic. And I guess in your case, you're looking at like a specific like anime film which you've watched before. But I think like the good thing about doing an anime thesis is that so many people are watching anime nowadays. And it's just only getting bigger as an industry. It's probably gonna like eclipse like Western like comics, for instance. So it's like, I don't know like if you have thoughts on like why study anime from like a scholarly lens, and also like which anime are worth studying from a scholarly lens. Like what makes something like worth on that sort of critical lens too.
Right. I think first to answer about the YNC context, I don't know why no one has done it, but I can say that there's been, like you said, a lot of research on very unusual fronts. Like I think especially the past and even this year's like literature capstones, people have looked at board names. People have looked at what was that? A series of Facebook posts, like Facebook flash fiction in like the year 1995, or even like web comics. So I would say people have been quite diverse in what they look at. But I don't know, maybe anime is this not exactly new media, but it's like middle age media that's been around for a bit, but also not old enough for people who like more traditional forms to look at. So it's kind of in an awkward position, and maybe also given how anime seems to be like a guilty pleasure for a lot of people. Maybe because of its the kind of subculture it portrays. Like, you know, there's usually going to be like a moe girl here and there. They're kind of like sexualized depictions. That people are just maybe they're not ready to deal with. Yes. About scholarly like studies, like what is really worth studying. I don't know. Just from what I searched, people always focuses on the classics. Like Ghost in the Shell, Akira. They focus on the big names, Miyazaki, Satoshi Kon. To the point, for me, to be honest, as a very contemporary person living in the present day, I'm like, I'm not interested. like they're too long ago, you know. I mean, I might have watched some of them, but there's been so much talked about them. And I'm just finding it weird that no one has looked much, you know, beyond Miyazaki. When the industry has clearly progressed since then to produce a lot of stellar works in their own right. So I felt what is worth studying is, I feel like a lot of works can be worth studying depending on your interests. Probably those that I don't know, those with a bigger message might be more worth your time, simply because they have more to unpack. You know, like it's not that like a slice of life anime might be any lesser, but might have lesser to unpack then. To be honest, before I settled on Kara no Kyoukai, that the other contender was this anime called Hyoka. Slice of life mystery. Some people who have watched it said it's boring. I find it quite sad. They just don't have the patience to sit with it. But yeah, it was between these two. But I guess why I chose one over the other was simply because one seemed to have a lot more to unpack than the other. But I think any anime can kind of be a legitimate study in its own right. I would definitely feel that talking about works that have not been talked about might be more worthwhile simply because they've not been talked about. And while there's been a lot of discussion online on fandom threads and all that, I think it's good for scholarly analysis to catch up. Because I mean, people out there are already talking. So.
I guess what in a way, like I'm also curious, like what. This is not to like denigrate the field or anything, but just like I'm curious like what you think the value of doing like for instance like anime studies or like literature studies is, and then in particular for like theses like yours where you're trying to tackle something that's more relevant to like people's lived experiences nowadays. Like if, for example, also if you did like a thesis on like Demon Slayer or something, that's like very relevant to what people are watching now. So like how do people benefit from like, I don't know, like scholarly studies on these? Like does it allow people to like get a better sense for like why these things are like appealing to them, or like should it give them some sort of like deeper insight into the media? Like I don't know, how does like benefit people in general?
I think definitely there is that level of effect where it functions primarily for a reader who doesn't know much or who has watched it to get a better sense of what's going on, especially for an anime that can be very confusing, and to better appreciate it for its craft. But I think other things about how this is supposed to function, obviously like you said, it's more contemporary, so I think what it does is it's kind of like a window into the past, right? Like for example, I say that Akira and like Ghost in the Shell, so that's too old, they're a bit not for my not to my taste, and maybe not to many other people's taste. Or so what about like things like from beyond like the 19th and 20th century, all the way back to the Middle Ages or classical antiquity? Like what if people are just not interested because they're too far removed? And I feel like analyzing some of these contemporary works, especially those they have a lot of science to unpack. Oftentimes they contain a lot of traces from these distant past, a lot of borrowed motifs, inherited aesthetic traditions. So I think being able to understand like the aesthetic traditions or the aesthetic things you see on screen in book as a continuation of something that has been happening, maybe they just took a different direction. It helps me better appreciate those distant books as well, because it's almost like a window into them. Yeah, like sometimes they make me appreciate it more than if I just engage with those sources directly. Yeah, because they are presented and represented in a way that I can appreciate currently. Yeah, and I feel like works that try to kind of recapture that kind of spirit from the past is very precious, because it also shows that in creating artworks or anime and writings, you're never quite alone in that sense. A lot of things, it's very hard to like fully original. I don't even think that's actually possible, because everything is kind of like a reinvention of something else. But that doesn't mean that it's not valuable. Like, reinventing has its own purpose, and you know how ultimately what is the point of it is, I think. You can't live in isolation and just be in the present. Like, you have to look ahead and look behind. And I think more so for the researcher, I think going through this kind of research also helps me better look at things around me. Yeah. And for aesthetic analysis, it's not just how to better appreciate the stuff you see on screen, but I think also like how I arrive at the conclusion in my capstone is that it helps me pay more attention to just all the things around me in general, you know, like things that you otherwise miss out, like how the building looks, what's the color, and thinking about like, oh, what effect does it have on you, and being more aware of your surroundings, being more aware of how you are emotionally like kind of affected by these things. I think one hand it can make you a lot more appreciative of just life in general, you know, of things that you may have taken for granted. And on another hand, it's also if you are aware of these things' effect on you, then you know that you know how to maybe better manage it, or like be careful. You know, you can't just live by with I don't know, maybe like you're living in a space in which you're deciding what color to kind of like paint the walls. You know, something as small as that can have profound effects over time on your psyche. Things like that. Yeah, I feel like there's maybe one possible way.
Yeah, that's very interesting. What do you want people to get out of your thesis? And also, like, if you have like someone watching, you know, kind of like Kyokai, like Paradox Star for the first time, or maybe like the 10th time, like, what do you want the adult to like take from the film? Do you think?
Right. I think. Okay, so maybe like a few things. The first one will probably be okay that you don't understand everything in one go, because it's interesting, because I've also experienced, or I have friends, or I know people who, you know, goes through series or like films without able to sit still, without being able to watch it all the way to the end before asking a question. It's just ask at every turn, like, why does this happen? Why does that happen? I guess that's the kind of inquisitiveness that's good, but also sometimes a moment that you latch onto may not be able to tell you the whole story unless you are able to like watch everything. So being okay with letting the answer just sit with you for a moment, and just, I guess, emotionally be part of it, you know, even if in terms of content you don't fully understand what's happening. Then another thing is, you know, hopefully once you've read this, you've watched the film, you also be able to lost my train of thought. I think second thing I wanted to say is, which is also something I didn't get to expand too much on, is sometimes whatever you are watching, reading, or even like, you know, experiencing, it doesn't have to be a one-off thing. You can kind of come back to it again. You don't have to understand it immediately, and if so, then keep coming back to it until you kind of know more things, you know. And I feel like each time you pick up on new things, and sometimes this happens outside the context of aesthetics or literature as well. Things like, you know, if you are traveling to a different country and like, do you have to travel to a different country every time? What if you head back to the same place, you know, and experience it, but you know, maybe pay attention and you might have a different experience. Yeah, I feel like it calls for depth of experience and understanding rather than just surface, but then you kind of check the box for many things. Yeah, and I feel like that's personally how I would approach things, live, text or films. And I think it would be nice if people could, you know, adopt that kind of way of looking at things for change, you know, even if ultimately they decide that's who they are. But it could bring very different experiences. Yeah.
So yeah, no, I have to ask, like, this is a random question. I would be curious, like, if you have any thoughts on, like, how do you think, like, Banasu might, like, react to your thesis? Like, like if you, like, be amused by, like, someone looking at his works from, like, such a critical lens, right?
Right.
I wonder, yeah.
And to be honest, as I was writing, I always thought, like, you know, what if I could get a hold of his contact information?
Yeah, right. Did you try?
No, because I think I don't know enough Japanese.
Sure, yeah, that makes sense.
But how would he react? I don't know. I mean, I think Nasu, based on his interviews and his reactions, seem to be, you know, he's very particular about details. But at the same time, he's very charitable with aesthetics in general. Like, especially when Ufotable first adapted Kara no Kyoukai, he was very impressed by it. And of course, to their credit, it was good. I don't know, I would hope he would, you know, if he even finds it interesting to try to read it, that would already be a great honor. How would he react? I don't know. I feel like I try my best to like keep the spirit of the work.
Yeah.
So I don't think I said anything that is too far off the mark. Yeah. Probably he might just think that, you put it nicely there, or like you managed to say it in a way that I can't say it. Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah, no, I just think like it would be cool if like he knew that this existed, because I don't know, like I guess there isn't that much literature about like you know, like type of works existing currently.
Yeah.
So it's like cool that it became a thesis. I think it's pretty interesting. And how do you feel about your thesis overall? Like, are you satisfied with it? Like, has it changed you as a person significantly? Were there like any regrets that you had, like, you know, after finishing it? It's like, I wanted to like include this analysis, but I didn't have time to like, you know, do this sort of work. Like, yeah, I guess like what's your general feeling about it?
I think given the time and resources I had, I'm reasonably happy with it. Like, I feel like there's the closure, and I'm glad I did a film screening because I feel like that was part of it, you know, like for there to be an audience was basically what my thesis was saying. So that brought me closure, and I feel regrets are quite minor. So like I noticed a lot of typos, and I'm like I would give to like change it. And of course, like this is not exactly even about the capstone anymore, but I didn't manage to write out my acknowledgements properly, and I'm like, now it will be circulated online with that the flaws up there. I'm like, like if I had a bit more time to like tie up, like clean up just the little details, it'd be great. But overall, I think like I'm quite happy with it, and I honestly for the longest time wasn't sure if I would feel this way when I finished it, because I constantly feared if I'll just finish and feel like I never want to take a second break, I just want to put it away. Has it changed me as a person? I feel, not say in an earth-shattering way, or maybe not yet. Sometimes I feel like it might take time for that to fully come in, but I do think it definitely taught me a lot of things that I've been struggling with previously. So things like being able to finish a project of this length,
for sure.
actually finishing it, because like I want to write my own stories. And for the longest time, the biggest problem was actually finishing. Because the moment I write something, I wanted to change it. And that was the same struggle I felt when I was doing capsule. The moment I write something, I feel like this is just wrong, and I just don't want to write it anymore. But I think capsule taught me that, this kind of processes, sometimes they just happen very fragmented. And I just have to try and keep going and trust that somehow it will, the moment when it finishes, it will look good. It's better than when it's not finished. Yeah, and then whether or not you feel good about it, it's not something that I can control. Yeah, it's really something that will only come true when I actually finish it. So I think, it taught me something important when it comes to that. Yeah. And of course, I guess I know the film better. You found appreciation for things that I otherwise did not pick up on the first few times I watched it. Yeah, and I think a sense of excitement for all the other new anime works, or just adjacent stories that are to come.
How do you think, I was through your schooling and stuff, like, how unlikely is it that do you think it was that you ended up being like a literature student? Like, does the schooling system that you've been through, and maybe like people, like Singaporeans like that, like go through schooling here, like, do people get like interested in literature at all, or is it just very hard to be someone who's very interested in like the arts or like, writing, that kind of thing, and pursue it at like a college level?
I feel that academically it's hard because Singapore is a very pragmatic place.
Right.
People tend to study the things that they think will be more useful, and the arts and literature included tend not to be on that list. So I think a lot of people are like they're interested in aesthetic experiences because why would it not be? Right?
Yeah, sure.
It's if anything, it's a good escape for what they're doing, but probably more as casual readers, casual viewers. I think going to this was not hard, thankfully. Like I always felt I had an affinity with it. What was hard was, I think, actually being able to how do you put it? Not letting like the industry, the commercial world dictate what I'm supposed to do. Sticking to what I'm interested in. Yeah. And another thing was I think I was in an art program when I was 13 and 14, and part of how I turned to literature was sacrificing my enrollment in that program. Because I kind of realized I'm not that good with doing art, and I had more interest in literature. Also, I didn't like how rigid the program was. Like for a course that's supposed to teach you about art, let you be like kind of run free with imagination. It was very structured and overly focused on certain mediums they think are clearly more pragmatic. Like they were trying very hard to just get us down the digital media pathway, and I just did not enjoy it. So I had to sacrifice that to make it for literature. But I feel I've not looked back since. I think some of what I picked up in that art program eventually helped my capstone in the end, because I learned a lot of visual analysis from it. So I think that was helpful. But I think in terms of literature, I'm glad for all the sacrifices I made.
Got it. So I guess like in light of the closure of like Yale and US, do you think it'll be harder for students like you to pursue these sorts of like projects or like learn about literature, or do you think like in the future there will be opportunities for people to like do sort of like literature and literary analyses? Because I know like some of the other colleges like or universities like NTU, like not SNU, but like NTU, like I know they have like a humanities program. I don't know how many people like, participate in it, but I don't know if it's like Singapore is just always going to be a hard place for creative like kids to like kind of like grow up and like be able to like
Right.
grow in that way, or yeah, like I don't know if there will be like total shifts. Like yeah, I don't know if like Yale and US is really a bastion like how it like advertises itself to be. I have no idea.
I mean, I think Yale NUS is not unique in its like offering like humanities programs, because if I didn't know the Yale NUS, I would have gone to NTU for the humanities program, and NUS has one as well. So people there, well, they have been doing interesting things as well. I think just yesterday, my literature friends found out that there was was it NUS NTU thesis about Pokemon.
Oh.
And that was quite cool. And I was like, oh, that's really like any topic under the sun. And I think people are interested. People are doing what they can. It's just, I guess, UNUS offers a more, I don't know, more support in that area maybe. In a way that is quite unlike the other universities. Like the other universities, they have a lot of support in terms of, they have a lot of faculty members, right? They have a lot of professors, they have economies of scale, they're quite big. I think what is said about the closure is just being able to do literature here means you get a lot of up close and personal consultation opportunities with your advisor, with your professors, you know, who otherwise in bigger universities might just not have the time to entertain.
Sure.
I feel a lot of people who did their thesis, at least from what I know, in NUS or NTU, they might only meet their advisor like twice or thrice, like not that many
Crazy.
times.
Yeah.
Obviously, some might need them more judicious, but yeah, I think that's the sad part. And of course, the willingness of professors who are not in your area of interest to actually supervise you and treat your work as something legitimate in its own right, and actually learn from it as well. Like it's very reassuring, because as a student you're always feeling like many leagues away from your professor, someone who has gone through PhD. But to have someone like that look at your work and tell you that they learned a lot, or like they really think it's good, it's very nice. Because it shows that maybe learning is not hierarchical. You're not supposed to be hierarchical. You know, it happens in many ways, in the ways we least expect. And I think that is what that is something that I think I will miss, and I think that will be sad that a lot of people will miss when once Yale NUS like completely winds down. Is the intimacy in the learning and teaching of things like literature, and of course I think the creative spaces as well, because here creative spaces can be accessed very easily, right? Not the case for many other places. You can be very spontaneous here, which is what I think a lot of people.
Yeah. Sorry, did I cut you off?
Yeah, no worries. So I think I was just saying, creative spaces here, bring the ability to be quite spontaneous here. If you want to organize a film screening, do it. You have the space, you even have a bunch of snacks, or ability to just host like an art jam. People can just do it. It's very empowering for people who are born in creative arts, and I always feel that it's probably not that difficult to do literature or humanities in Singapore or universities, but what is hard is to actually do creative work. Because when it comes to humanities, you are staying safe, you know, like especially for literature, you are looking at creative work, but you are looking at it as like an analyst, like a scholar, but you're not actually doing it, you know. But doing it, I think, is different, and the Singapore artistic community, it's there, but it's definitely considered not pragmatic, not well-earning, not stable. And that's why a lot of people might shy from it. Which also means they are missing out a lot on that kind of experience. Which I feel, the college has been able to provide.
So interesting. Like, also, I'm curious. Like, I don't know. I think there are definitely a lot of like weebs in Singapore, and there are probably a lot of like K-pop like stands too. I think. But to me, it just seems like Singapore is a place where a lot of people with different interests come together. It doesn't, or like different, like people who like art come together. But I don't know if there's necessarily artistic sort of culture that's
Right.
uniquely Singaporean. Like I don't know if Singapore like will develop that in the coming years. But I guess like Singapore is a very young like country as we like understand it now. The current Singapore, it's very young, so I guess maybe it doesn't have an artistic identity. But do you think that will like develop in the coming years?
I would hope so.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, since Singapore is still quite young as a country, so maybe not enough time for a distinctive kind of artistic culture development just yet. But I mean, some have been gaining traction, like Singaporean literature, Singaporean theatre, even. But of course, it's still very much like in the bubbling phase. Haven't quite found its footing. I think it's also hard because a lot of the times, I think to be artistic here, you have to be very deliberate. Yeah. There's not much room for you to just casually do it. And hoping for that casual to become something substantial. Yeah. And of course, your spaces are heavily regulated.
Yeah.
So even when it comes to funding the arts, everything is very, very like state engineered. So they will definitely promote things that is more in line with what the state is trying to promote.
AI art or something.
Yeah,
something
possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, things that they feel like the arts can be serviced to.
Right.
So that might be why it's hard as well. Yeah, a lot of, and of course a lot of these artistic groups and artists are either freelancing or they require a lot of support from patrons, from general public. And if something like COVID happens again, where funding becomes an issue, I feel like it might die out pretty quickly, or like it might just regress because because Singapore just doesn't have that very hospitable environment for it to do creative work. Yeah, so whether or not it will find its distinctive mark, I think also depends on whether or not the community and the culture can survive in substantial form before it is erased by some major incident or pandemic.
Yeah, I guess like final thing. What do you want to do in the future? Like, yeah, you mentioned you want to do some like writing if you can, but I guess like what are your like immediate plans after college? Like, what do you want to do like long term? Do you want to go to like grad school? Do you want to be a writer? That kind of thing. Like, where do you want to end up?
I mean, definitely take a break first.
For sure.
Because it's been tiring. But I will definitely work in the short term because I have student loan to repay, so that may take a while.
Exactly.
I am likely working for a creative agency. They do many things. It's different from marketing because it's not just selling things, but curating exhibitions, planning maybe like theme park attraction concepts, things like that. Like it's the one job that I feel like it makes me a little bit less dreadful, a little bit more hopeful for what's to come. Because especially after you've had such a good college life, you can't help but wonder, is this the peak and is this the end of it? So for the short term, definitely going to be working. Then continuing my writing on the side, just trying to produce something. And then in the long term, hopefully do a master's. Again, depends on funding. But I would likely do a master's either in literature, either in East Asian studies, because that's, I think, the context I'm most comfortable with, or creative writing.
That's very cool. But yeah, no, definitely wishing the best for you in those fields like that. No, I really appreciate it. This is super good, man.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for this.
Good time.
Appreciate it. Yeah, sorry it was like an hour and a half.
No, don't worry. I honestly, I wasn't looking at the time at all.
That's good.
It's just